Hello, I am Trustee Terry Vorderer from the Village of Oak Lawn. I represent the 4th District, which pretty much encompasses the Christ Hospital to 103rd, Cicero to Pulaski. And I'm here today with one of our Commissioners of Review. His name is Don Patlick. Did I say that right, Dan? Dan Patlick, thanks. Dan is here, and I am here to give you some information on how you can appeal your property tax. We all know that government costs money and there is a responsibility to fund government, but nobody wants to fund government more than they have to. So there are a number of different processes in which you can have your property reviewed and see to it is properly assessed. And that's what Dan and myself are here to do for you today. Dan, what is the Board of Review and what is their mission?
Well, Terry, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I really appreciate being here. My office, the Cook County Board of Review, is the county office that reviews property assessment appeals. So if you're a property owner, whether it's residential or commercial, industrial, vacant property, or a condo, you can come to us if you think your property assessment is too high, file an appeal, present evidence. You can even have a hearing if you want to, present your information, and then we make a decision of whether or not your assessment should be reduced.
Thanks, Dan. And we get into this interview a little bit farther. We'll talk about how you can appeal this taxes and how we go through it. Now, how did you get to be a commissioner of this particular important board?
Well, it was sort of a long journey. Back in 1999, I went to work for a person from this area. You may know the name, Maureen Murphy from Evergreen Park.
Yes, I do.
She used to be a state rep, and she was the first Board of Review commissioner from the southern suburbs. And she hired me to be an analyst and also her communications specialist at her office. And I worked for her for 8 years. And during that time, I worked residential property, commercial apartment buildings, and exempt properties. And then after 8 years of service, unfortunately, Maureen was defeated at the ballot box. And I, along with many of her employees, left the Board of Review. But 4 years later, I ran against the person that defeated Maureen, and I defeated him. And I became a commissioner at the Board of Review in December of 2010.
Well, thank you for that information, and thank you for your service to Cook County.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I enjoy it.
Now, there's a lot of property in this county, and so I imagine your office is pretty busy?
Yeah, the numbers have gone up in a strikingly rapid pace. Back in 1999, the first year that I worked at the Board of Review as an analyst, the number of appeals was right around 50,000, or maybe 60,000. Last year, we had our 4th record year in a row. The Board of Review adjudicated 245,000 appeals. And as I said, that was a 4th record year in a row. So the previous year, it was 228,000. Before that, 208,000. And before that, 182,000. So the increase has been dramatic, and we expect it to continue that way.
That's impressive. And what is the success rate if I were to file my appeal and present the evidence that I feel I'm being overtaxed on my property? Is there a percentage?
Well, the reduction rate varies from year to year, and in the years that I've been at the Board of Review, I've seen it as low as 49%, and one year I saw it go as high as 73%. Keep in mind, though, that includes all reductions. So some of those reductions are small. Some are large, but between 49 and 73%, not bad. The last few years, it's hovered right around 62%, and that's for all property. If you're talking about residential, the reduction rate tends to be higher than that.
Well, that's impressive. So actually, the process is worth going through, and your success rate is pretty good, probably.
Yeah, keep in mind, some people will say, oh, well, that means that 60% of all property in Cook County is overassessed. Not necessarily so, because remember, the people who are actually filing appeals are the people that think their assessments are too high, and frequently they are. A lot of times they've done their research ahead of time. They have good reason for believing the assessment's too high. I suppose if every property in Cook County were to appeal, the success rate or the reduction rate would be dramatically lower.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, how would you go about filing appeals?
Well, the Board of Review opens for appeal for a 30-day period for each of the 38 townships in Cook County. There's 8 Chicago townships and there are 30 suburban townships. So normally the Board of Review opens its session, and this year it would be the 2019 session. We open it in the first week of August. However, because of the tremendous volume that we've had, and because we believe that that volume is going to continue, we've decided to open a month early. So we actually opened on July 1st our first 7 townships, and none of them are Worth Township, which is where Oak Lawn is, where you're a trustee.
Correct.
I should say, yeah. But every township will be open probably by late January of this year. They open for a 30-day period, and when your township opens is the best time to file your appeal. We have 2 methods to do it. We have an online method, which is the preferred method. It is the fastest, easiest, most efficient, and most interactive with the Board of Review. You can go to cookcountyboardofreview.com. When you're on our homepage, you will see big letters that say File Your Appeal. You click on it. That will take you to a portal that is specially made for appeals at the Board of Review. And on the upper left-hand corner, there are 2 methods to file. One says file as a guest. I recommend not doing that because there's no particular advantage to it, and I'm not going to say anything more. The other one says login/register. The login part is if you filed an appeal in the past and registered an account. So if you did, all you have to do is remember your password from the previous year. But if you are like most people and you didn't do it last year, you can register an account, which will be an account for you and your property in perpetuity. At the same time that you're registering that account, you're filing your appeal. At that point, if you choose to, you can upload your evidence right into that file that you've created. If you don't know how to upload, you can simply mail the evidence in, and then you can withdraw from the system. Now, if you file but you don't have any evidence at that point in time, as long as you didn't indicate when you filed the appeal that you were done with your evidence, as long as you didn't do that, you can come back in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and upload the evidence that you get at that point. That's the online appeal process. If you want to file using paper, for instance, maybe you don't have a computer or you don't know how to use a computer, that's fine. We have paper complaint forms, and you can pick them up at any of the local township assessor's offices, or you can call the Board of Review and we will mail you a form and you can mail it back to us.
Thank you. And our Worth Township Assessor's office is 116th and Pulaski. Just go in the front doors, you turn to your left, and that's the commissioner. I've done this myself. I've picked up the forms and appealed, and I was successful with that appeal. So the process does work, and I'll swear to that by my own experience.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Terry. And yeah, the local township assessors are a huge help to the local constituents. And my office works closely with them to make sure that they have all the information necessary to help their constituents.
Well, thank you, Dan. One other thing, how would I know? Listen, everybody thinks they pay too much property tax, but how would I know if I'm paying too much property tax compared to my neighbor?
Well, there's several reasons why you might be paying too much. One of them is that your assessment is too high. So the question is, how do you know if the assessment is too high? There are a variety of reasons upon which someone might file an appeal at the Board of Review if they think their assessment is too high. So I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to explain them to you very quickly because to explain all of them in detail would take probably close to an hour. The most common reason for a residential property owner to file an appeal at the Board of Review is called lack of uniformity. All that really means is that your house, Terry, is assessed higher than other similar homes in your area. And normally at the Board of Review, we're looking at the assessment per square foot of living area of your house versus similar homes. So if your house was assessed at $10 a square foot, but similar homes in your neighborhood were assessed at 9 or 8 or 7, those homes that are assessed lower would be your evidence to send to the Board of Review and say, hey, there's a lack of uniformity in the assessment of my property. My house should be reduced to where these other homes that are assessed lower are at. So I would say over 90% of the residential appeals are based on lack of uniformity. However, there are other reasons. So another reason would be market value. Let's say, and this happens every so often, more often than we'd like to see, that there is a neighborhood where the assessor has done a good job with uniformity. In other words, all the homes of similar type are assessed, $10.50, $9.50. They're all sort of together. They're uniform. But suppose all of the market values that the assessor has on those properties are too high. In other words, he's got them all uniformly assessed at $400,000 in market value, but their true value is more like $300,000. You could file a market value appeal, and what we would need from you in that case is information about properties like yours that have sold in the last year or so for less than what the assessor says that your house is worth. You could get that information either from your local township assessor. They have a database with that information on it. You could call a local realtor who can print up the information from the multiple listing service. Or if you want to, you could hire an appraiser. And the appraiser would do an appraisal on your home to establish a fair market value. So that's the second reason for appeal. Third reason, if you bought your house in the last 3 years and you bought it for less than what the assessor says that it's worth, you could use that recent purchase as long as it's an arm's length transaction, meaning that it was not a short sale, it was not a foreclosure, and it was not between relatives. You can use that sale to establish the real market value of that property. Next reason, a mistake in the description of the property. For our purposes at the Board of Review, the most important mistake that the assessor can make in the description of your property is in the living square footage. Because, for instance, if the assessor were to say that your house was 1,500 square feet, but in reality it was only 1,000 square feet, you're probably paying 50% more on the building portion of your assessment than you ought to be paying. And if that's the case, you want to file an appeal based on an error in the square footage. You want to submit evidence like a plat of survey, an appraisal, architect's drawings, a letter from a certified architect who has inspected and measured your home, perhaps photographs. All of those together, as much as you can to prove that what you say about the square footage is correct and what the assessor says is wrong. The last reason is vacancy. So suppose something happens to your home. There's a fire. And as a result of the fire, you're no longer able to live in the home. While you work with the insurance company to get reimbursement, while you work with a contractor to restore the house to its previous condition, you have to move out. For the period of time that you're out of the house, we can grant what's called a vacancy on the building portion of your assessment for the time period you're out of the house. Now, of course, you must present evidence that that happened. So if you had a fire marshal's report would be great evidence. Photographs of the interior and exterior damage to the property would be good evidence. An affidavit from you explaining what happened. We woke up in the middle of the night. The house was filling with smoke. We called the fire department. They came. They broke all the windows. They broke down the door, filled the house with water, put out the fire, and left us with a house that was unlivable. That would be your affidavit to us. Perhaps an affidavit from a neighbor testifying to the fact that they witnessed that there was a fire and that you didn't live in the house for a 4-month period. Paperwork from the insurance company, an agreement with a contractor that fixed up your house. Maybe a letter from the village of Oak Lawn saying that they're pulling your occupancy permit. They're saying you may no longer live in the house. So we know you had to be out by that date. And then maybe a subsequent letter from the village saying we're restoring your occupancy permit. Then we know you were out on this date, you're able to return on this date. Very easy for us at the Board of Review. Vacancy is not limited to just a fire. If you lived by the Des Plaines River and it overflowed, you might be flooded out of the house. You could have mold in the basement that's coming up the ductwork, making the family sick. You could get hit by a tornado. Some drunk guy could drive his car into your living room.
Boy, I hope that doesn't happen to anybody, but it's nice to know.
It happens once in a while.
It happens once in a while.
I'll tell you 2 interesting stories about vacancy. I live in Wheeling. We have Chicago Executive Airport. 3 years ago, we got an appeal from someone who did a good job. They gave us all the kinds of information I was just describing, but the best evidence they gave us was a newspaper story. It had the story and a photograph. And the greatest thing was the photograph, because it was a picture of a single-engine airplane with a tail sticking out of the roof of a house.
I remember that pic. I do, I remember that.
Well, we saw that, and we gave them a reduction. We gave them a vacancy on their home.
At least first-class tickets.
Yeah, yeah. When I was an analyst at the Board of Review, we had a hearing, a public hearing, and if you're an appellant, you can ask for a hearing at the Board of Review if you want to. Most people don't, but sometimes it's appropriate. And this time it was, because a fella came in and he said he was looking for a vacancy. And I said, why? And he says, well, I've got a crack in my foundation. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps that's affected the value of your home, but I don't understand why that would cause you to have to move out. He said, and he pulled out a letter. And he had a letter from the village of Des Plaines. And the letter said, we're pulling your occupancy permit, but it didn't give a reason. So I said, okay, could you expand on this letter? What's the real story? He says, well, apparently I have a river flowing underneath my home and has caused the ground to shift, and as a result, my foundation is cracked. I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's probably severely impacted the value of your home, but you're not appealing based on the value of your home. You're appealing based on vacancy. Why is the village insisting that you move out of the house? He says, well, the village is concerned that the ground is going to shift further, my gas mains are going to rupture, and the house is going to explode. So I said, all right, you got yourself a vacancy. So those are the 5 main reasons someone will file an appeal at the Board of Review, and how you can figure out if you're overassessed.
Thanks, Dan. You know, a lot of people feel that this is more complicated than they can handle, and they need an attorney. Today in the mail, I was solicited for a representation by a reputable law firm to represent me. My personal experience, I did it myself, and it was not that complicated. But can you, and do you think that that's an avenue to go if you just want to retain an attorney and do it?
Well, there's nothing at all wrong with hiring an attorney to represent you. Most of the attorneys I come across are professional, they know what they're doing, and they do a good job for their clients. However, there is no rule at the Board of Review if you're a residential property owner and you want to do it on your own. Now, the rule is if your property is incorporated, which is most commercial and industrial properties, then you're required to hire an attorney, because the Board of Review is considered a quasi-judicial office, sort of like a court, and the only people that can represent someone in a court are an attorney or the defendant themselves. In this case, we don't consider our appellants to be defendants, but they are filing in essence, a legal motion for a reduction of their assessment. So I would say that the average person certainly has the ability to learn how to file an appeal on their own and collect the evidence. I do assessment appeal seminars, probably about 40 every year between August and January, and I'll be doing them this year. They will be publicized. So if you live anywhere in the southern suburbs, whether it's Worth or Palos or Orland, Lamont or Lyons or Bremen Township, I'll be doing a seminar in your area, and I would encourage everyone to come and watch the seminar. Now, if you come to the seminar or if you don't, if you just don't have the confidence in doing it on your own, there's help out there. Every township has a local township assessor. And I know you and I spoke earlier, and you said that you've availed yourself of the services of the Worth Township assessor.
Yes.
They have a professional staff. They help hundreds, if not thousands of people every year file appeals at the Cook County Assessor, which is a separate office from mine. And then in many cases, subsequently at the Board of Review, my office, and they provide them with the evidence and instructions on how to actually file the evidence.
Well, thank you, Dan. You know, what you covered the whole exemption thing pretty good, but there's a lot of exemptions that I think many of my residents here in Oak Lawn might qualify. For example, senior exemptions, okay, living in primary residence. Can you touch a little bit on those type of deductions on your tax bill?
Sure, happy to. Well, first, everyone should know that all exemptions are administered by the Cook County Assessor's Office. So if you don't get an exemption, it's the Cook County Assessor that you want to go to and try to make sure that you're getting what you deserve. An exemption is also something you're entitled to if you qualify for it. So the most common exemption in Cook County is a homeowner exemption. The only qualification for that is that you live in the home as of January 1st of the tax year in question. So for instance, we're all getting our tax bills, we got them right around July 1st. If we qualified, if we lived in our home on January 1st of 2018, the tax bills we just got were for the year 2018, we should qualify for the homeowner exemption. And that should have been reflected on our latest second installment property tax bill. The homeowner exemption went up in value about a year ago from $7,000 in equalized assessed value to $10,000 in equalized assessed value. Now, that's not actual tax dollars, but the higher your tax rate, the more valuable the homeowner exemption and any other exemption will be. So homeowner exemption is number one. Number two, you mentioned, the senior exemption. Senior exemption, to qualify for that, you have to be 65 years of age or older in the tax year in question. So again, for the bill we just got, you or your spouse or the other owner of the home, if there is a second owner, would have had to have been at least 65 years of age or older sometime during 2018. Whether or not it was January 1st, 2018 or December 31st, you get the full benefit of the exemption, which is now worth $8,000 in equalized assessed value. That also went up in value. The next is the senior freeze. Now, the senior freeze does not freeze your property taxes. It freezes your equalized assessed value. But by doing so, it slows the rate of growth of your tax bill, assuming that property values are going up. Now, if property values are staying even or going down, the senior freeze won't help you very much. But in a traditional market where values are going up, over time, that exemption can become worth more and more. Now, to qualify for that, you have to live in that home for at least 2 years. Your previous year's total household income can be no more than $65,000. And by the way, that just went up a year ago from $55,000. So there's a whole group of people out there who were making more than 55, less than 65, and couldn't qualify for the exemption. So if one of your constituents is one of those people, they should be aware that they can now qualify for it, and they should apply for it. And by the way, in a market where the value of your house, let's say it went down for a few years, and you had been frozen here, but the value went down here, they changed the law for that too. Now that the senior freeze is worth $2,000 off your equalized assessed value no matter what. So that's a minimum savings on your equalized assessed value of $2,000 no matter what happens with the market value of the home. I'm going to mention just one other exemption because one of your constituents out there might be able to use it. It's the most valuable exemption, but it's the least used. It is the disabled veterans exemption. This was changed about 3 years ago to become much more valuable to someone who would qualify. So the two parts that stayed the same are this. If you're 30 to 49% disabled from a service-related disability, you get $2,500 off your EAV. If you're 50 to 69% disabled, you get $5,000 off your equalized assessed value. But if you are 70% or more disabled, as certified by the Veterans Administration, you will be free from paying any property taxes at all, up to a value of approximately $1 million in home value. And the other benefit is if you're married and you get the exemption and you pass away, your surviving spouse will continue to get that exemption as long as they live in that house and remain unmarried. So a very, very valuable exemption. And Terry, if you have any friends that are disabled from the military, you should let them know about that.
Thank you, Dan. I am the commander of Disabled American Veterans for the northern region of Illinois, and I have worked very, very hard, as you do, to educate our members on all the benefits they've earned serving this wonderful nation. They've made some extreme sacrifices. They've given their sweat and their blood, and I think they certainly deserve some form of compensation throughout their life.
Agreed.
So I'm well aware of that, Dan.
Good, good.
All right. Well, I think we've pretty much covered most all of it, Dan. Dan is available, okay, at the Cook County Board of Review. If you have any questions, he'll make himself available. And I know Dan personally. If in fact you have any questions, I'll reach out to Dan. Again, thank you for watching. I am Trustee Terry Vorderer, and I'm here with Dan Patlick, okay, Board of Commissioners Review.
Terry, could I add one last
Sure.
thing? We have a website we created about a year ago, which has all the information I just discussed, plus even more. It's a one-stop shop. It's danpatlack.com. If you go to danpatlack.com, you will see videos chopped up in pieces of the seminars that I've done in the past. There will also be links to websites depending on the kind of question that you ask and have answered. I guarantee that you're going to learn a lot for it, and it'll be a good refresher for you anytime you take a look at it. So look up danpatlack.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Terry.
Bye-bye.